Good day, friends. Welcome so much to another TechSoup Canada event. But now let's get to what we're here for today, which is a bit of a discussion around how we can take qualitative data and turn that into something that we can actually feed our strategy, feed our organizations. Because in some ways, we're all drowning in data, but what do we do with it? How do we make sense of it? Is the big thing we are often struggling with. So that's really what we're going to talk about today. And to do that, I've got a pair of guest experts. So today we've got Yashna and Akshay, who work at the intersection of design, data, and impact, helping teams over at Ooloi Labs make sense of these complex realities using their application Dot. You're going to learn all about their work today. So get there into the reactions emojis, give some virtual applause, and please welcome me in joining our two experts for today.
Thank you everyone for joining on time and for this discussion. I am Yashna. I'm one of the co-founders of Ooloi Labs, where we've built this cool tool called DOTS. And honestly, till last week, it was called Open Knowledge Framework. So we've recently renamed it to DOTS. And very, very excited to have you. Yeah, as introduced, both Akshay and I would be talking about uh, a few things around qualitative data and how we're using qualitative data to make sense for nonprofits across the globe. But we're based out of India, so we're speaking from India. Specifically, I'm talking from Delhi in India. And yeah, before we start and talk about our platform Dots, we just wanted to share a few things which were around some frameworks and principles on how we've been using stories and how do you structure those stories to make sense at scale, and then talk a little about how it's impacted a few organizations, and then go into the little bit on the demo of the tech tool, having and then have some time for Q&A. By at the same time, you could always share your questions on chat and we can maybe address them after the presentation. Yeah, before we get started, I just wanted to start with a story, which is again from our part of the world, which is a story from India where I was on ground, and this was in Uttar Pradesh, as a state in India, where there was a program run by the government to distribute menstrual pads in India, and specifically in specific parts of the country and specific parts of the state. And we heard about the success of the program, which was around 90% of girls were using those pads, and one of the most successful programs in the country. That was what the data spoke. So we actually wanted to go a little deeper into what had happened. And we met this principal, one of the principals in one of those schools where the metric did a match on 90% success rate. And when we met her, she said she had joined a month ago, and she said before she had joined the school, the program was a failure. And we said, why do you say that? The metric actually gave us a great number, and that's why we're here to know more about this. And she said that was a failure because when I came in, the attendance was still poor. There were a lot of girls who were not joining, and essentially that was the reason why this whole program had been started. But that was not being measured. And we said that what did you really do to find out? So she said, I got in all the girls in one room and asked them, did you get the pads all these months that was getting distributed? They said yes. And then they asked, did you use the pads? And then again, they said yes. And note, this is also pre-social media days. So a few years before that. So the access to knowledge was also limited. Um, and then she felt that there's something missing because if they've been using the pads, the data doesn't add up. And she then asked for what? I just want to open it out to the folk who can write this in chat. What do you think the pads were being used for? Art projects. Nice. Selling them. Yeah. Anybody else? Any ideas, thoughts? Yeah. Great. They were using it for stuffing pillows because nobody told them what it's used for. And for months they were doing that because again, there was nothing that was getting captured on how that data really, how that those pads really were supposed to use. Just sorry. And that's the beauty of call data. Like it reveals those blind spots that metrics miss. And it is important to capture this nuance. It is really, really important to hold call data against the cont data, because if you miss that, essentially your entire program could be a fail. And I just want to pause here for everyone who feels that in their while this is a context which is from a part of our of India, but it could be in the context from where you belong. And what is that story, or what is that incident and experience that you feel could have changed if the call was also included in that entire project? I just want you all to reflect over the course of this hour or even after to really see where all you think all can be included. Because this is one story from one stakeholder from one school, and it could, and it wasn't even a planned find, right? It was just that we happened to go and speak to her and realize that, oh, that wasn't a success, and we didn't even know how many more schools were going in that direction. But what happens when we actually scale stories, and when we actually collect so many stories from different parts of the globe, from different parts of the country, or even in your thematic, if there are different stories, when we scale stories, so do the challenges. Again, if I can push folks from to write in chat, if you all have worked in with call data, what have been your challenges? Right. Would love to hear more in chat what your challenges are. But some of the challenges that we've faced with organizations, and people are often come and say that call data at scale is extremely messy. It could be different forms of data. It could be interviews. It could be notes. It could be observations. It could be different teams collecting data. It's all over the place across geographies. How do you make sense of it? Idea for us, and how we worked is, when you have so much data, how do you really make sense of it? And I'll be sharing a few principles on how we at Dots and at Ooloi Labs have really worked with those principles and applied that to tech. And honestly, even if there isn't any technology, how do you really take those principles and apply it in making sense of qualitative data for yourselves? So the first one is quite basic, which is often when you're working with data, this is important, but often forgotten when it comes to qualitative data. And that is listening with intent. We are, what are we really capturing this data for? Is it for best practices? Is it for early warnings? Is it to understand behavior change? What is it? Because if you don't define that, you have too much and you don't know what to do with it. And the first idea is that at least we define that inquiry defines that insight, and we need to have that intent in place. So that's very, very important and critical as the first thing. The second is, which is quite an oxymoron, when we say call data is unstructured, we say, I'm going to say structure the call and structure the chaos. Because once when we say structure the call, it doesn't mean we're converting it into quantified data, but the idea is to make it such that there are ways for it to be structured and synthesized eventually. There are ways for it to be analyzed, and not just by applying one blanket rule, right? There are common qualitative data sources, like what we've seen with organizations is stories from various stakeholders. It could be short qualitative responses in surveys, or even app data, FGDs, interview transcripts, routine reporting, and a lot more. Like there can be different kinds of call data sources, but when structured and when shaped in some ways, it can help you really bring those insights forward. An example of this is, you don't have to read what's on the screen, but I'm gonna share some ways in which how we work. Is the first one, templatizing what we want to capture. And this is an example of a school leader sharing stories around challenges they faced across this in when working with students and working with teachers and working with governments on really what are the challenges and what are the successes of it. So we started with breaking that down in not just saying I want to have from the list, I want to capture 5 challenges. It's really what are the challenges you currently face, and then give them a little bit of nudges, which is think about daily operational difficulties. Mention any systematic or policy challenges that you must have faced, and giving a little bit more nudge on really for them to be able to talk and share more. The second part is once your story is structured, or your field observation, or like a way for you to share qualitative data is structured, there is an important point of tagging it right. Which country is the school leader speaking from? What are the school types? What are some services provided in the school? That helps you get some metadata for it to then be able to get structured at the end. The last one, and I mean there are many more, but for now, just the last one is after the data is achieved, how do you annotate and code it as another layer for it to then be like, can I further tag my challenges on what I'm seeing and reading? And that's also something that we do a lot on the platform, because once we do this kind of structure, these are not labels. They basically become metadata for you to then analyze your data quite smoothly, because it's easy for you to then surface patterns for seeing what are the repetitions, for seeing what is the dissonance. It'll enable insights across scale, across time, across stakeholder types. Because when these knowledge pieces are broken, and when these anecdotes are broken, they essentially become knowledge units for you to then be able to make sense and visualize this data. So you could actually say within my knowledge units, what were the top challenges that the school leaders faced, really quantify that data, and then drill down into what were the anecdotes associated to that. You could also do cross linking if you want to find challenges across lack of time and policy misalignment and the systemic constraints, and even see if there is a school type connected to it, and see all those data points in one place for you to then make sense of it for your programmatic decision, for your policy advocacy, for whichever reason you're capturing that data. The last one, which is one of my favorites, is to tell a complete story. At the beginning, I made a point on um, call data is not enough. A con data is not enough. Same call data alone will not be enough. And how we treat it is that it's important to tell and put call and con together, because con tells us the what and call tells us the why. And structured call is important to be put together with the con, because when you do that, that call data adds depth, it detects early signals, it reveals those hidden variables for you to see their entire picture. So those are four frameworks and 4 points that we follow. But just also talking about, since you're talking about data and you're talking about tech, it's important to talk about AI. People often say that what happens when call and meets AI, and honestly, when there is no structure with call, you could essentially, when there's no structure with AI, you could essentially make sense of something which may not be correct. But when you apply that structure, that's where the magic lies, right? Because you then can summarize across levels. You could summarize at a programmatic level to even granular fragments, and really see what is the difference between what's happening at those programmatic level or at a state level. You could make sense from stories quite quickly, because you can identify themes, patterns across large volumes of data. At honestly, AI helps you do that pretty well. And the last one is for researchers or for people who worked with call data, the lens has always been pattern finding, but with AI, it can be pattern asking, because you can really query that data and ask questions, which could be at a zoomed in level and a zoomed out level, from field quotes to high level summaries. All of that can be really a question, and then you get the summaries because the data has been put up and structured in a in a proper way. And that's been our fundamental of really setting up dots and helping more and more organizations use this data to make sense of it. I'll quickly share two impact stories of how our partners have been using it, and then we'll go into a quick demo by. So yeah, just sharing two examples. The first one is what actually I had shared as a reference earlier, which is this platform called Principal Speak by global school leaders who have been documenting stories from school leaders across the globe, just learning about their challenges, their success stories across themes, across. They earlier started this program for 5 countries, and now they are scaling it to 125 countries. And people from different parts of the globe honestly have been sharing so much depth and so much knowledge about what really is happening on the ground and what are the challenges plus success stories that they have. And now what they're doing is, I mean, it has also been a platform for school leaders to learn from each other, for global school leaders to communicate across on what is really their impact, because they have been the ones training a lot of these partners who are then taking the program forward to train school leaders. That was the initial impact of the platform. But now what they're doing is taking these stories, putting it across the con data that they capture across these countries, and then going to each government government of Indonesia, for example, to say that what are the top challenges within your country. What are the challenges that your school leaders are facing, and how can we work on improving the policy for school leaders, or even doing some hyper local changes at particular state and district levels. So that's been the journey with Principal Speak. Another example, which is a very different example, which is with an organization based in India. They have programs for girls after school. So they have these after school centers. And they had done an inline assessment on the platform where they wanted to know what were the absenteeism reasons. And instead of doing a drop down or a quant survey, they opened it out as a qualitative input where girls could share what were the issues, and at a granular level within a particular state, within a particular region in that state, we found insights like they couldn't attend school because lack of streetlights, and it was too dark for girls to travel alone. And this is not an insight only from the education department lens, right? It is a larger lens that needs to be applied for solving something like this. And it also opens a lot more for people or for programs like these to target and aim for enabling girls to get that access to knowledge in those programs. So we've been working in different in with different organizations across the globe to also learn more with such organizations on how to really leverage call data and and really bring that change faster. So that's what I'm going to leave you all with, that let's give structure to our stories and let them speak to numbers, because they can do a lot, because we aren't drowning in data and we're starving for meaning. I'll pause here for Akshay to share a short demo with us.
So I'm going to do a quick demo of the Dots platform, just to share with you that this is a demo where we took for context. We decided to take an example of an organization that is doing a longitudinal study around water sanitation and hygiene. And essentially, what the study does is it's trying to understand perceptions, attitudes, and behaviors that define how individuals in rural or urban India and Kenya make decisions around the sanitation facilities that they use, and their adherence to the usage of those facilities. And essentially, the way that we've set up the platform, all of it is synthetic data, it's all generated data. But the way that it's set up is that to begin with, you have a demographic questionnaire, essentially, where whoever is the researcher is able to add very specific bits of data, like the name of the participant, select which country, the state or county, and the demographic questionnaire is largely a quantitative template. And then the idea is that I mean, what we are trying to simulate is a study that happens, say, over 6 months, where initially researchers go and recruit the participants and then go back every month or so to repeat a deeper ethnographic sort of interview and observation exercise. So the demographic questionnaire does this. It has radio buttons, the meta tags that Yashna talked about, and also being able to select multiple options for certain things. We then, let's very quickly look at one of the hypotheses. See, hypotheses two, right? This one has you select which respondent that you are interviewing from the list so that it gets tagged back and you have access to all the demographics data, and you'll see how it helps. And then you can have a mixed method template, right? So here we have a mix of quantitative questions, but also short form qualitative questions, like the one that Yashna mentioned, that was used by our partner to determine the reasons for absenteeism for these young girls who were coming for the after school program. And then, an open ended text box where the interview transcript can be added. Let's see what that looks like, right? So on a platform like this, we've added the demographic questionnaires, let's say for 100 participants, right? 50 from India, 50 from Kenya. What happens on Dots is that when you set up a template, and as soon as you start having some data, what we do is we set up an overview dashboard. Now, this gets set up automatically. It takes all the quantitative questions and visualizes them this way. And of course, you can kind of change some of these. So I don't want to see a bar chart. I want to see it as a pie chart, so on and so forth. I can say I just want to see the data from this province or state of India, and kind of, start kind of looking at the data that way. So it allows you to get that first overview. The qualitative data that you add becomes available in a format that's now become quite familiar to many of us, which is the AI chat. So you can start chatting with your data as the data has come in to start getting a broad overview around what the data is saying. I've asked a question here: what are the primary reasons that respondents are unhappy with their current sanitation solutions? And it sort of gives me a summary around inadequate facilities, stigma and fear, economic barriers. But what it also does is it tells you what it is referencing when it is coming to this conclusion, right? It is referencing very specific chunks of data from the raw data. And I can then also potentially, I can click on that data and see the actual raw transcript from which this has been got. Coming back for a second to the demographic questions, right? So if I see the demographic questionnaire, all 100 responses, I can also start drilling down response wise in the data. So I go to the response wise tab and I say, let's see what kind of toilet facilities these respondents are using. It starts giving me, this data, it visualizes it for me. It also shows me all the responses, and this becomes really useful when you're looking at qualitative data. But then I want to filter this, right? I want to see very specifically, how this is playing out in India, right? And so it gives me a filter of just the India data. And then I want to break it down based on, let's say, the type of residence, right? So in India, we can see how it breaks down across rural, formal urban, and semi-formal urban. So these are, low income settlements, and how are people dealing with it in those situations, right? So we start kind of seeing, that data get visualized this way. And all of this gets set up automatically. So it gives you a way to start engaging with your data without having to, sit with a data scientist, get that going. The other thing is, now this is how you start drilling down into the quantitative data. But how do you drill down into qualitative data, right? And this is where our ability to annotate or code the data brings in certain very scientific ways of working with qualitative data. So what you can do is select pieces of text and tag them with sub themes or tag. So we have three levels at which you can tag. And here, a researcher has gone and tagged all of this. On our platform, on Dots, you can do completely manual tagging. So our partners who are doing deep qualitative research studies often are using completely manual tagging. But our non-profit partners, who are the volume and the velocity of the data is so high, that they use AI supported tagging, where AI, based on the context of the platform and the data collection and your themes, suggests what snippets or fragments of text need to be tagged with which of the tags or themes, right? So you do this. Now you've gone through, your 100 odd responses, you've done the tagging, or you've used AI assistants to do the tagging. Where does it show up? Right? It shows up on what we call the Annotation Explorer, right? So here I've selected it so that it's showing me the annotations only from the first hypothesis. And, you can go through, you can see how across different themes, certain tags show up, what is the count. Again, it starts giving you a little bit of a flavor of which way the data is leaning, but you can also read each and every one of the fragments. You can click on one of them and go and read the data in more detail. But even before you do that, what if I can summarize it? So I summarize all these text fragments on my screen and I'm able to see this summary. But that's, when you have a summary of all the data, that's very useful. But this is 100, pieces of data. And frankly, usually people are working with a much larger set of data over a period of time. So what happens if I filter a little bit? Because I have a sense based on AI chat that I want to understand specifically what people are saying in rural contexts, and especially those who are on the lower end of monthly incomes, right? And so I can start seeing what people who lie in that demographic are saying, what came up in their interviews, and then I can summarize that as well. And then I'm able to get a snapshot of, what did Abdul Rahman say, or what did Omondi Ovino say, and how that all comes together. But of course, I can, then click through and I can kind of read these text fragments in more detail. I can see, how else it has been tagged, some of the key demographic functions and how they show up. Lastly, we have the ability to set up custom reports. Now, this is something that my colleague set up earlier today, which shows a report that focuses very specifically on an aspect of the first hypothesis, which was investigating what is the role of religious beliefs in, how people choose their sanitation practices. And so what this does is it allows you to set up these custom reports, publish them, share them with stakeholders who can then see here, Dhwani, my colleague, has put a little bit of text explaining, what each row of the report is. It shows you the religion demographic in our data set overall, so you can kind of look at that. It gives you a district-wise breakdown. Largely, this happened in these districts, so this is the sort of breakdown of that. It gives you a count of the annotations under ritual religious beliefs. So ritual purity and pollution is a big factor. It pulls out a few key annotations or the text fragments around religious beliefs. And then, you start seeing some of these heat maps, right? So let's look at the emergent annotations versus religion, right? Like, so shows up with what annotations across age groups, across residence type. This is, of course, very editable, configurable, and also seeing what sort of facilities people are using across, by various religions. And she had asked this question around, do religious beliefs influence people's toilet usage in AI chat? And, she saved that chat and added it over here. So she sort of copy pasted it from AI chat. And of course, we have a lot of the filters available. So you can start, even with a report, start kind of filtering down the data. That was a whirlwind demo. I'm sure
I hope some of these things piqued your curiosity and some of it stuck. But thank you so much, Yashna. Back to you.
So a few features that we haven't covered in the demo, and a lot more ones we can go into for the demo. But for now, just sharing that we do have ways to batch, import, and set API connectors with other apps and other database such as Kobo, DK, WhatsApp, where we can pull in a lot of data. The data can be captured on the platform itself through surveys. It can be share. I mean, people can directly read stories. It can be like interviews, but all these ways of taking in data is also possible. There are integrations with Slack, Miro, Zoho Connect, and more that we can build. We've built in the past, which are also there. There is also language support, so you can write in any language, and depending on what language have you set on the platform, you essentially read. If it's English for me, I could read everything in English. And there is granular access control, which we work with some organization to set up to say what is visible for people. So the principal speak, as I said, could be a platform that is a platform that you all can read only the stories, but everything else is behind the login. White labeling and all these other features are also available on the platform. Just one last piece is that we have been onboarding a few organizations on trials for this platform where they can use it with some of the data that they have, and we've already done. Shortlisted for cohort 1. We'll be releasing cohort 2 quite soon. So if you are interested in using this platform, you could scan this, and our colleague Pratiksha or Roop would share that trial link also in chat. But you could basically scan this as well. You can also get on our website. This is our new link of the website. Again, something you can scan right now. And the website is getdots.in, which would also be something Pratiksha and Elias probably already shared. And the last is please follow us on LinkedIn, because we actually are quite consistent on LinkedIn and share a lot of updates on LinkedIn. The link will also be available on the chat box.
I've got some questions coming in from the chat. I would encourage the rest of you to keep throwing things in there, and I'll act as your voice and sort of bring these here to our experts. So let's go to the very beginning. I'd like to get it. So I see you've had like this idea where you can sort of put these hypotheses in, where you actually are getting really explicit about like, I want to test this idea. Talk a little bit more about this, the development process. When you think about a hypothesis, what are the key elements to it? Like, how do you start saying like, what are the things I want to like try and pull out of a problem?
Maybe I can take first stab, Yashna. Then. I think, Eli, the thing is that the example that we shared was an example of an organization that structures its foundational research in a certain way. So they lead that research through a hypothesis. But, when you look at other contexts, like if you're looking at monitoring and evaluation, for example, that is led really by the log frame or theory of change and the various sources of data that you might take. So our focus very much is that organizations are collecting data for certain reasons, and they might have, different ways in which they do it. So hypothesis, it's an example from research, but if you're doing monitoring and evaluation, you might have a baseline study and an endline study. You might have focus group discussions that happen, a semi-annual survey, reporting formats, and all of that sort of coming together to help you form a bigger picture of the outcomes, but also to be able to dive into the granular to be able to iterate and improve your program. So I hope that helps.
Great. Yeah, no, that's helpful. Got a question here coming from Varada, who's saying like, so we've got these texts, but can we bring in images or videos instead of text transcripts? Like, can I bring in multimedia into this tagging interface?
Yeah, maybe I can take that. So how we work is only text and analyzing that, but we have integrations. We're working on integrations to get in audio currently and then transcribe that through that integration, then use it on our platform. Similarly, there would be video, but we're working on those integrations. Image analysis is something which is a little far, but there are ways to upload images and keep it as like a place for on the platform. So there's image audio upload available and the integrations for changing it into text because the platform works best with text.
Great. So I've got a question coming in here from Roger, and there's a question I had too, which is around taxonomy development. So Roger says the biggest problem we all face is that we're all using words differently to mean slightly different things. And that depends a lot on like cultural background, gender. Like, how do we think about developing our taxonomies? And the side to that is like, is that a place potentially where some of these generative AI tools may help us enhance and make these a bit more reliable as we start to think about taxonomies and tagging?
Maybe I'll take first stab, but I think Yasna, you'll also have a point of view on this. I think one thing, the way that we work is because it's not a single platform for everyone, right? It's extremely context specific. And by context, I don't mean cultural context. I even mean an organization. So I'll give you an example because we're very sensitive to that. And so that taxonomy has to be shared and understood within an organization or the group that is analyzing the data together or using that data and those insights. And that is, something that's very important. We, for example, when we work with translations, often we work with our partners to do very, very contextual translations. We don't use standard translations for the user interface because we really believe that it matters even in India, right? If we're doing a language like Hindi, one organization working on sand mining does its own translation as opposed to another working on education as opposed to a third on health. So I don't think it's really that possible to have that sort of shared taxonomy because it's so subjective across teams, even if they're in the same domain, in the same regional context. So yeah, there's just some thoughts on that. Yashna, if you add or refute.
I think a part of it, Akshay, you've covered. The other part is when it comes to taxonomy of coding and tagging. The way again, there's no perfect solution for this. We've also been. It's one of the bigger challenges when it comes to culture context and figuring that out. But the way we work is also giving access on code books and such, which I think many other tools are also doing for people to then assemble and tag and make sense of it at that stage where you could group tags and really find those themes which fall under the similar structure. So those are some attempts. I don't think we have a final answer of, oh, this is how you're going to figure out and all of that. So yeah.
Right. And this sort of comes into a question that came in from David Newman, who's saying, like, where does the AI assistant help or potentially hinder versus doing manual tagging, like in something like deduce? So I think the question is, so you've got the core tag, like, but obviously there's like 7 maybe related terms that could also roll up into that tag. Are you explicitly defining up like that constellation of related words to sort of help the AI find the right tagging connection, or are you just letting the generative AI make its own guess around that constellation of related words?
Yeah. So I think what Roop has also shared a little when it comes to deductive coding, when you have structures in place, when you're getting into code research questions, AI does a pretty good job. And we are true believers of AI is not going to solve problems immediately, maybe in the future and very soon. But currently, we give a lot of context even while saying that, hey, now annotate automatically, because in the deductive structure, it helps pretty well because you've already defined those variations of words and tags and what you see as what you may call something as success as best practice, and they're different words, but you've defined it and you've given some context to it, so it does a pretty good job. Inductive is still something where we've seen manual works because then there are these different contexts talking about the same thing. So we believe that's where it's still learning and growing, and we're also growing with that. But again, deductive is something we feel that it's quite accurate, and the models themselves are becoming stronger day by day to understand cultural nuance. So we also, when we are giving context to AI, there's a lot of context that we give before saying, hey, just figure it out yourself. So
Right, right.
I just want to
So,
add one
go ahead.
point.
Go ahead.
Sorry, on the AI front, right? I think there's a hurry right now to try and use these large language models. And, so like Yashna said, we found it works quite decently with deductive coding, but with inductive, we're trying to see how to improve the quality. And what we're realizing also in, I think it's a classic thing where come full circle, you realize that there's so much fantastic research that has happened in a pre-LLM era when you looked at
Yeah.
NLP and machine learning and things like that. So part of our effort right now is also to dig deep into that research that's happened over decades and how do you bring that into the product so that we're not simply, just throwing all the text at LLMs and trying to kind of make it work and just really how do you bring that science and rigor in a very user friendly, more
Right.
modern sort of application. I think that's our continuing R&D effort.
Yeah. So I've got a question coming in here from Aaron, and I think it's probably a common question for a lot of people, just to say like, okay, I'm at the beginning of my journey. I may not be ready to take on a platform that's gonna, do this work for me. What's the light and easy minimum viable project kind of approach I could use to start capturing my team's impact? Because we're all in organizations. We all get these stories that we sometimes hear about and it just like passes us by. Is there like what's like a light and easy approach people could use just to start systematically capturing some of these impact stories that we're getting from our clients, from our staff, and sort of socializing others to use it? Has anyone had any success with like even just simple spreadsheets or other kinds of tools that can help capture things in a light way to start?
maybe I can start and Akshay can add. So we've actually worked with a lot of organizations initially where we didn't really use the tool because they just wanted to get started. So we honestly just said that, hey, this is just start with a template. Just see if you can structure your questions in a way that they're not like a form where you're asking some open-ended questions about what really happened in the last week on
Yeah.
the ground. Can you elaborate a little more? Like really identifying those questions would act like probes and working with that template across weeks. So we worked with this organization for Foundation for Mother and Child Health, where we made a simple template, 5 boxes kind of a thing, used one Google Doc or any document, and then say, use this template to share every week one story and one insight, or something that happened on the ground that you want to share. And that became that prototype for them that, hey, what am I doing with call data? Because over the course of 1 2 months, they got so many stories from people because a lot of it was also behavior change because a lot of these people who were actually reporting from ground were like, why do you want to read my story? Why do you want me to share? Because you've never shared. I've always worked and acted on the ground. And sadly there was a behavior change happening in those 2 months because like there is so much that I have to share. Because these questions help me form my thinking of
Hmm.
really how do you add that data every week and the next week that you can also make a note that, hey, I want to share this with my team. So we really helped them change that lens. And in the 2 3 months of engagement, we got a lot of input from the ground. And it was a cleanest prototype. There was no pressure of I want to make sense of it right now. I just wanted to hear from people. Use this template and share every week. Make rituals around sharing with
Yeah, yeah.
snippets. That changed again because they like we anyway do Monday meetings. Can we make that a ritual or like on Friday check out? Make that a ritual that I want to share before I check out because that's something is important for me to contribute.
I thank you. I think my brain was going that same way too. It sounded like, yeah, like ritual to making it a regular thing seems to be so important. To have one person who sounds like they can own it and push it out. Say like, oh yeah, it's your weekly time. Like, tell me, did anything interesting happen this particular week? And so it sounds like that could be just a simple form. It sounds like
Yeah.
a successful form should probably be short, so people might actually do it. You were talking like 5 questions. And as for
Yeah.
what those questions should be, I
Read the
imagine that
words.
really depends on the organization's, like, what is the
If I
impact they're trying to
can
measure. Go ahead.
actually, couple of things I just want to add there, right? I think one is, I think everybody has it, these tele-shopping network, those things middle of the night, and they sell you these products like, I didn't have any friends and I got this product, now I have friends. Like, I feel like a lot of non-profit stories end up sounding like that, like success stories, like this was the problem, non-profit came in, now it's a success, right? Because we're tuned to tell those stories. And part of this process is also just breaking that notion that you have to tell those kinds of stories. And so I think, one part, Eli, to your point about it is contextual. I think if you remember what Yashna was sharing, the nudges can be contextual. But we had worked with some experts on storytelling, like they train people, children, corporates on storytelling, and they work with frontline workers. And what we realized is that there is a broader structure for a story, right? Like, which is these sorts of stories, which is give me context, right? Paint a slightly vivid picture of the backdrop against which your story is going to take place. And then tell me the story, right? And that story, the nudges can be around, building a richness to the characters, what happened to them. And then, really ending with, what is that current situation? So that's a fairly broad structure that leaves things open for richer observations, failures, attempts at things or challenges, right? And then it can really add more texture overall to what you're listening to. So that you don't fall into the trap of getting very clear success stories.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I think that's helpful. As you say, like there is a body of best practices we can draw upon from data, from taxonomy, around storytelling. Well, friends, we are coming up towards the end of this meeting. Let us wrap this up.